Welcome to Dark Mind Theory. Subscribe now so you never miss videos like this one. George Stinney was only 14 years old when he was executed in South Carolina in 1944. His trial lasted just 2 hours, and the all-white jury reached a verdict in only 10 minutes. His feet were too small to touch the floor of the electric chair. In 2014, his conviction was overturned. Jesse Owens earned 4 gold medals at the 1936 Berlin Olympics in front of Hitler himself. German athlete Lutz Long secretly gave Owens technical advice that helped him win the long jump event. Long died 3 years later in Sicily, but the two men continued exchanging letters until the end of his life. Courage, injustice, and the fight to survive. Sophie Scholl was executed by guillotine in February 1943, only 6 days after her arrest for handing out white rose pamphlets in Munich. She was just 21 years old. The executioner, Johann Reichardt, later admitted he had never seen anyone face death so calmly. Georges Blind, a 40-year-old French firefighter, was captured by the Gestapo in October 1944 for assisting the resistance movement. To force him into revealing names, German soldiers staged a fake execution. Blind smiled directly at the rifles and refused to speak. Days later, he was sent to Auschwitz and killed upon arrival. General Eisenhower visited Ohrdruf, the first Nazi concentration camp liberated by American forces, in April 1945. He ordered troops and journalists to document everything they saw. At Buchenwald, nearby civilians were forced to walk through the camp so nobody could later claim ignorance. It was the first moment ordinary citizens were made to confront the crimes committed in their name. Many fainted, and 3 people took their own lives in the days that followed. Ned Parfitt sold newspapers on Ludgate Hill in London on April 16, 1912. A fellow worker photographed him holding a headline about the Titanic disaster. 5 years later, at only 21 years old, he died fighting on the Western Front during World War I. Hachiko, an Akita dog, waited every day at Shibuya Station for his owner for nearly 9 years after Professor Haitsuburo Ueno died suddenly at work in 1925. The dog stopped coming only after his own death in 1935. A statue honoring Hachiko was built while he was still alive in 1934, and people visited daily to feed him. His preserved body remains on display at the National Museum in Tokyo today. Daisy and Violet Hilton were conjoined twins who became famous movie stars during the 1930s. They shared blood circulation through the pelvis and married different men despite never living separate lives. Both sisters died on the same day in January 1969. A rare photograph shows Billy the Kid playing croquet with the Regulators gang after a wedding in 1878. Experts spent 5 years authenticating the image using facial analysis, chemical dating, and clothing studies. Today, the photograph is worth nearly $5 million. Jacob Miller was struck between the eyes by a musket ball during the Battle of Chickamauga in 1863 and was left for dead by fellow soldiers. Doctors failed to remove the bullet completely. He survived another 54 years with an open wound in his forehead, and fragments of lead continued surfacing until 1894. Robert McGee was scalped by Chief Little Turtle in 1864 when he was only 13 years old. He survived because the attackers assumed he had already died. Later, he spent years traveling with Midwest circuses, charging people 5 cents to look at his scar. Harriet Tubman completed 13 dangerous missions through the South and freed nearly 70 enslaved people without losing a single escapee. During the Civil War, she also worked as a Union spy and led a raid along the Combahee River that freed more than 700 slaves in one night. Iconic moments that changed history forever. The famous Kiss of Life photograph was taken in Jacksonville in 1967. Randall Champion suffered a 4,160-volt electric shock and hung unconscious from his safety belt high above the ground. His co-worker, J.D. Thompson, climbed the pole and performed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation while suspended in the air. Champion survived. The dioxin used to poison Viktor Yushchenko in 2004 measured nearly 50,000 times higher than normal human levels. It remains one of the deadliest toxic substances known. He survived the attack, later won the election, and nobody was ever convicted. Janina Novak became the first woman known to escape Auschwitz. In June 1942, she jumped from a moving cattle train. As punishment, Nazi guards shaved the heads of every woman in her block. Janina survived until 2013 in Poland. Ruby Bridges entered William Franz Elementary School in 1960 escorted by 4 U.S. Marshals. White parents removed all their children from the school. For an entire year, Ruby studied alone with a single teacher willing to teach a black child. King Leopold II displayed African pygmies in European human zoos until the 1950s. Commercial hunters also used pygmies as trackers, paying them only with salt and tobacco. During this period, eastern gorilla populations declined by more than 75%. Marilyn Monroe personally contacted the owner of Mocambo in Los Angeles and promised she would sit in the front row every night if Ella Fitzgerald was allowed to perform there. The club only welcomed white customers at the time. Ella performed, and her career exploded afterward. A terrified couple hid beneath a bridge during the Tiananmen Square massacre in China. Generations born after 1989 grew up with little knowledge of the event because references to June 4th became heavily censored. Of the 29 scientists attending the Solvay conference in 1927, 17 eventually won Nobel Prizes. It was there that Einstein and Bohr first publicly debated quantum mechanics. Marie Curie remains the only person in the photograph with Nobel Prizes in both physics and chemistry. A courtroom image from Al Capone's 1931 trial shows gangsters hiding their faces from photographers to avoid identification. Capone was prosecuted for tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years in prison. The Statue of Liberty was a gift from France. It was assembled in Paris, separated into pieces, and shipped to New York in 350 crates. The original torch stood in Madison Square Park for 6 years while Americans raised money to build the pedestal. The famous Times Square kiss photograph from 1945 was captured by Alfred Eisenstedt. For decades, the identities of the sailor and nurse remained unknown. In 2012, the sailor was identified as George Mendonça, while the nurse, Greta Friedman, admitted she had never met him before that moment. Simone Seguin began sabotaging German trains at age 17 during World War II. At 18, she helped capture 25 Nazis in Chartres. A photograph of her holding an MP40 became internationally famous. She died in 2023 at the age of 97 after receiving France's Legion of Honor. Monte Cassino was bombed 4 separate times before finally falling. Spitalfields in London's East End was considered one of the harshest slums in the industrialized world in 1903. Average life expectancy there was barely 30 years. The chuck wagon was created in 1866 by Texas rancher Charles Goodnight. The wagon contained 32 compartments filled with tools, medicine, and food supplies. Ranch cooks earned nearly 20% more than ordinary cowboys and were treated like untouchable figures on the trail. Any cowboy who argued with the cook usually paid for it through burned meals. The standard cowboy diet was beans, biscuits, bacon, and coffee served 3 times daily. Bear therapy remained common in rural Romania and parts of the Balkans until the 1980s. Healers traveled between villages with trained bears that stepped on patients suffering from lower back pain. Surprisingly, it often worked for the same reason massage therapy works, except with nearly 440 pounds pressing down. Chinese foot binding began around the 10th century and continued for almost 1,000 years. Girls as young as 4 or 5 had the bones in their feet broken to stop growth. The ideal foot measured only about 2 3/4 inches long. Historians estimate nearly 2 billion girls endured the practice. Although officially banned in 1912, it survived in isolated villages into the 1950s. Croatian Catholic tattoos were marked onto girls beginning around age 10. The tattoos were meant to stop Ottoman kidnappers from converting them. The custom survived for nearly 500 years, especially in Bosnia. Elderly women still carried symbols inherited from mothers and grandmothers before them. Steam perms became one of the beauty tortures of the 1930s. Women spent up to 8 hours attached to a 31-pound machine heating hair to almost 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Inventor Carl Nessler tested the machine on his own wife first. During 2 experiments, she lost parts of her scalp. The Chinese kang used until 1912 was a heavy wooden collar weighing up to 44 pounds. Prisoners could neither lie down nor feed themselves while wearing it. They depended entirely on strangers or family members to eat. Theft, adultery, and gambling commonly earned this punishment. In 1979, a young woman held a protest sign outside the Metro Theater in New York during demonstrations supporting adult cinema freedom. That year, Mayor Ed Koch's administration attempted to shut down nearly 140 Times Square theaters. The No Bra movement spread rapidly after the Miss America protests held in Atlantic City in September 1968. Feminists threw bras, corsets, and fake eyelashes into what they called a freedom trash can. By the 1970s, thousands of women marched through New York without bras. By 1971, bra sales had fallen nearly 30% worldwide. In 1957, Alfred Hitchcock posed serving tea to Leo, the MGM lion mascot, during a promotional photo shoot. The image advertised Hitchcock's new 2-film agreement with MGM Studios. Hitchcock later joked it was the first time he had truly felt fear. During the 1920s, police officers on American beaches measured women's swimsuits with rulers. Skirts ending more than 6 inches above the knee could lead to arrest for indecency. Those laws survived until 1937. Paris hosted the Beautiful Eyes competition between 1929 and 1939. Every judge was male, and winners were often cigarette models or nightclub performers. In 1932, winner Malene Rupert earned 5,000 francs, worth roughly $3,500 today. Leather sunbathing masks became fashionable in America between 1928 and 1940. Women wanted deeply tanned legs while keeping pale faces, since dark facial skin was linked to outdoor labor. The trend disappeared after Coco Chanel made tanning fashionable. In 1907, an alligator farm in Los Angeles kept nearly 1,000 reptiles swimming in open pools. Children rode small carts pulled by alligators while tourists watched. Owner Joe Campbell sold handbags, belts, and meat made from the animals. The farm finally shut down during the 1950s because of cruelty accusations. Pig races entertained crowds on California beaches from 1910 through 1930. The pigs sprinted after pieces of corn. In 1925, a pig named Speedy reached nearly 17 miles per hour in Long Beach, a record no competing pig ever matched afterward. Pie-eating contests without using hands remained wildly popular across America until the 1940s. In 1929, the record reached 23 slices in only 7 minutes. Some contestants vomited mid-competition and continued eating afterward. During the Normandy invasion, Allied bombing campaigns killed around 20,000 French civilians before troops even landed. Children orphaned during the bombings were often cared for by soldiers in the following weeks. Jim Thorpe won Olympic gold in both the pentathlon and decathlon in 1912. Hours before the competition, his shoes were stolen. He found 2 mismatched shoes in a trash bin, stuffed one with extra socks, and still won the event. Sweden's king later called him the greatest athlete alive. The 391st American Battalion camped near Mount Vesuvius during the massive eruption of March 1944, the volcano's largest eruption of the century. Ash destroyed nearly 80 American aircraft. Soldiers toasted bread over flowing lava while waiting for evacuation. In 1935, a few Civil War veterans were still alive. The last veteran finally died in 1956 at 109 years old. Black shoeshine boys earned about 5 cents per pair cleaned. On a successful day, they made the modern equivalent of $8, most of which supported their families. Antoine Yates secretly kept a 440-pound tiger inside a Harlem apartment for 3 years. He also housed an alligator named Dull in the bathtub. Authorities discovered the animals only after Yates arrived at a hospital with a severe bite wound and falsely claimed a pit bull caused it. London's Great Smog of 1952 killed nearly 4,000 people in just 5 days. Visibility dropped below 1 foot. Drivers abandoned vehicles in the middle of roads, while movie theaters closed because smoke filled the buildings. Uncle Sam was inspired by Samuel Wilson, a meat supplier during the War of 1812. Army barrels marked US were jokingly interpreted by soldiers as Uncle Sam. The famous pointing poster was later designed by James Montgomery Flagg in 1916 and helped recruit 4 million soldiers. The Onabugeisha were female samurai trained from childhood. They fought using the naginata, a curved spear over 6 feet long that was lighter and faster than a katana. Tomo Gozen, the most famous warrior, fought during the Battle of Iwazu in 1184 and personally beheaded an enemy general. A mechanic was photographed climbing outside an airplane cockpit in 1940 to repair the engine during flight. Dangerous stunts like this were common during the early years of amateur aviation before strict FAA regulations appeared in the 1950s. Outdoor barbers in rural towns charged only 10 cents for a shave during the 1930s. When razors were unavailable, some barbers actually used sharpened hatchets instead. The result depended entirely on the steadiness of their hands. On Pacific Islands during World War II, American soldiers cared for wounded military dogs trained to detect enemy troops. Around 11,000 dogs served with Allied forces during the war. Belgian coal miners traveled underground in steel elevator cages called man cages, packed with 20 to 30 workers at a time. The elevators descended nearly 650 feet at speeds of 40 feet per second. Fatal accidents happened frequently. Emmeline Pankhurst was arrested 13 times during the women's suffrage movement. She carried out 4 hunger strikes and was force-fed through tubes shoved down her throat. In 1914, she attempted to deliver a petition demanding voting rights directly to King George V and was arrested on palace steps. The head of Christ the Redeemer weighs roughly 33 tons and measures around 12 feet tall. French sculptor Paul Landowski created it in Paris before shipping it to Rio de Janeiro piece by piece. Brazilian Catholics paid for assembly entirely through donations. The first selfie ever taken dates back to 1839. Robert Cornelius photographed himself in Philadelphia using a daguerreotype process. He stood motionless for nearly 15 minutes to capture the image and later wrote that he simply wanted to test whether the method worked.